Hello, my MGTOW brothers, back again, in for another program. It's been a while. What inspired me to come back and actually do another program is something that's been on my mind for a while. What's been going on in the manosphere, talking about what MGTOW is, the future of MGTOW, and also the future of the culture. So in my private life, the same questions have been popping up, but not necessarily related to MGTOW, but the same questions have been popping up. So what I decided to do was put on my analyst hat and actually look at it from the lens of not necessarily being a MGTOW, but being a sort of pseudo geopolitical commentator. So my method is to kind of blend things and think out of the box, because that's what I do. That's the way my mind works. So I decided to, just break down the barriers and take the lid off the box and actually let my mind wander and think about where MGTOW is going, where the human race is going. And I find that those two questions are one and the same. So I decided to do this in sort of an off the cuff discussion first to see if there was any interest. But I want to lay down the argument of what I think MGTOW is, where it's going, and what the future is. So in this brief video, I'm going to be talking about concepts and arguments that most people, I don't think, will, or I should say have, thought about putting these two things together, or even thought about MGTOW and human culture this particular way. So I'm going to make this short, and if there's any interest in pursuing these particular avenues, I'll do a longer video or even a series, because that's what it's going to take to flesh out all these ideas, because I presently haven't completely fleshed out my theory or my thoughts on this particular thing. Now, briefly, we're going to touch on the basics of where the theory lies. Apart from our brain size and our intelligence, what makes human beings different from the other animals, even the other primates, is the adaptive culture that we use to survive. Whereas most other animals and insects and other living things use their biological bodies to adapt and interface with the environment, humans use their adaptive culture. I won't go into detail here because I've done about 3 or 4 videos on culture. You can go back in the archives on my channel and you can actually look at them, where I go into a lot more detail. But suffice to say, looking at the diagram of animals and even pre-human animals before we developed our culture, you can see that the diagram shows just the animals or the beings surrounded by their environment. And that's what animals and even pre-humans used to adapt and survive in their environment. If their environment changed, their bodies had to change. But the first Homo sapiens used their culture as a buffer between the environment and themselves. They made tools, they made clothes out of skins, they learned to cook and process their food, so on and so forth. And that culture was passed down from person to person. So as we evolved as human beings, so did our culture. It got more refined, and it went from a thin layer between the environment and ourselves, and as we evolved, it broadened. So as before, when we were primitive, we depended on the environment to feed and clothe us and keep us warm. Our culture started to adapt the environment around us to feed, clothe, and keep us warm. So as the buffer got bigger between us and the environment, and our skills in our culture to adapt the environment got better, we started to spread out across the globe. And as time has gone on, our culture has continued to expand greater and greater, taking us into more environments and altering the environments to the point where in modern cities and modern urban environments, the original environment is no longer recognizable. The places where most people live is almost completely artificially adapted by our culture. But that's a two-way street. When you adapt the environment and change the environment, you also slowly but surely, through evolution and natural selection, start to change the biology of the human beings inside. So culture is actually a two-way street. It acts more quickly on the physical environment outside of ourselves, but a lot more slowly on the inside of ourselves, changing our biology. And that's the way it was for hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions and millions of years. Slowly changing our outside physical environment, and even more slowly changing our biology, our internal environment. 200 years ago, with the Industrial Revolution, all of that started to change. Now the speed of change for all of that has started to quicken exponentially. Our culture, our human culture, which had been heretofore a buffer zone, an adaptive mechanism, has all of a sudden become a driver with the advent of computers, nanotechnology, and biotechnology. What used to be a reactive synthesis between our natural world and environment and the human biological personalities inside that environment has now come to be the dominant force in human history. In my estimation, what's happening and what's going to happen is that human beings and human culture is going to go from a model that, used to look like this when we started to looking like this as we sit right now. And with the speed of change, it's going to eventually wind up looking like this, where culture consumes both the environment and human beings and becomes the driver of both. And to borrow a term from mathematics and physics, I'm going to call this the cultural singularity. Singularity, a point at which a function takes an infinite value. The most famous example of a singularity is the theoretical diagram of a black hole. In the diagram, you can see where all the factors of time and space, pulled by the gravitational pull of the black hole, pulls everything in, accelerates down to a single point where time and space are all considered to be one. The inventor and author Ray Kurzweil took this idea of the singularity because of what he saw with the culture and technology. He concluded in his studies that human technology and human knowledge was doubling in complexity year after year and having in time of the doubling. And it was acting much like the black hole, thus the singularity. And he published this in his now famous book, The Singularity is Near. He theorizes that we are now at the cusp of the event horizon before the cultural singularity actually pulls us down into the vortex and accelerates our technology and our knowledge infinitely. Looking at this simple chart of the progress of human culture or human knowledge, you can see exactly where we are and how fast in the last 100 years that human knowledge and human technology and human culture has sped up and where we are right now. So what does all this mean for the future of the culture and the future of MGTOW? MGTOW, like any other cultural instrument, is dependent on the environment that surrounds it and the culture of the people inside. The culture of the people inside is directly related to human biology. What MGTOW is based on past events, but also the speed of which these past events change. That's how we have predicted the future and the outcome of MGTOW. So thus far, our physical environment changes like every decade. Our cultural environment changes like every 150 years or 7 generations. And it takes tens of thousands of years for our biology to change. But what I'm saying is that as we get closer to the event horizon of the cultural singularity, all three of these things will change rapidly. Unlimited energy and new technological materials will completely transform our physical environment. Gene therapy and biotech will completely change our biology, such as the artificial womb, extending lifespans, healing diseases, that kind of thing. Even changing our bodies to the point where sex differences will be no more than changing one's body makeup through manipulation. With the speed of information, cultures will blur into unrecognizable lines. Against that kind of backdrop, there is no way we can predict what MGTOW will be in 10 years or 20 years, or hell, even 5 years. The advent of male contraception and the increased use of surrogate mothers will completely change sex roles and the roles of men therein. So what I'm saying, brothers, is stop looking at the past, start looking at the future. As the culture changes and as our biology starts to shift, we will look back in 10 years and look at the phenomenon of men going their own way as an interim step into something greater and better for our own independence. Like always, comment, make another video, drop me a note. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's break outside of our box. Let's stop crying in our beer and start getting proactive and getting ready for this future.